Grimora. Snow had been falling across the small New England town since early afternoon, turning the streets into narrow white lines and the houses into shapes blurred by steady drifting flakes. On the edge of town stood an older two-story house with dark wood siding and a wide porch facing a line of leafless trees. A wreath hung on the front door, its red ribbon dull against the cold. Inside, the heat from the old furnace moved slowly through the vents, never quite reaching every corner. Rowan Hale stood in the front room and watched his breath linger faintly in the air near the windows. It was Christmas Eve, and this was the first year his family had agreed to spend the holiday in the house that had belonged to his late aunt. The property had transferred to him in the will, along with a brief note written in a tight, careful script that advised him not to stay in the house during winter. The note mentioned the upper hallway and a door at the end that should remain closed. He had read it once and folded it away, assuming it was an old family superstition. Heating repairs had been put off for years, and the realtor had mentioned uneven insulation on the second floor. Rowan had decided that any stories about a particular door were connected to drafts and faulty vents. His partner, Marissa, unpacked boxes in the kitchen while their son, Nolan, walked in slow circles around the downstairs rooms, carrying a small model train engine in his hand. The house smelled faintly of dust mixed with pine from the tree they had dragged in earlier. Electric candles flickered in the front windows. Somewhere deep in the structure, pipes shifted and gave off a dull sound that repeated at odd intervals like a slow heartbeat. The storm had intensified by early evening. Local news on the small television in the living room ran an advisory that secondary roads might become impassable overnight. Rowan turned down the volume and looked toward the front door, where snow pressed against the glass in a fine sheet. They were settled in for the night, whether they liked it or not. Nolan paused at the bottom of the staircase and stared upward. The stairs led to a narrow upper hallway lined with doors. Rowan followed his gaze and spoke in a level tone, mentioning that they would set up Nolan's bed in the downstairs den for now, since the upstairs had not been fully checked. Nolan did not respond. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something distant. Rowan asked what he heard. Nolan said that someone was talking upstairs, but the words were not clear. He said it in a casual way, like it was a background sound that did not worry him. Rowan walked to the base of the stairs and listened. All he heard was the movement of the furnace and the wind pressing against the roof. He told Nolan that old houses made stray sounds and that the wind slipped through places in the walls. Later, after dinner, Rowan went upstairs alone with a flashlight to examine the rooms. The hallway felt colder than the floor below. The doors on either side were slightly misaligned from age. 3 of them opened onto standard bedrooms, each with an unmade bed and simple furniture covered in sheets. Dust traced every surface. The last door at the end of the hall, however, showed a different condition. Its frame had been painted over more than once, sealing the edges in an uneven line. The knob was old brass, darkened by time. When Rowan touched it, the metal felt colder than the surrounding air. He tried to turn it gently. The knob moved, but the door did not open. Something held it in place from the inside, something heavier than paint. He examined the floor and saw no sign of recent disturbance, no footprints in the thin layer of dust near the threshold, no scuff marks. For a long moment he stood in front of the closed door, listening. The house shifted around him. Wind slid under the eaves. He heard faint noises from the floor below, where Marissa moved in the kitchen. Nothing came from behind the door. He exhaled slowly and turned away, telling himself that the wood had expanded in the cold and sealed the frame. He went downstairs and locked the front door for the night. By the time the digital clock on the mantel showed 10 o'clock, the town outside had disappeared behind thick snow. The roads were empty. Only the dull glow from a few distant houses broke the uniform dark. Inside, lights were dimmed, and the living room was lit mainly by the tree. Nolan had fallen asleep on the pull-out couch in the den, the model train set on the table nearby. Marissa read in a chair near the window, wrapped in a blanket. Rowan checked the thermostat again. The temperature refused to climb beyond a certain point, floating at the lower end of comfortable. He felt an impulse to go upstairs once more. He told himself that it was only to confirm that all windows were secure before the storm intensified. He did not explain his reason to Marissa. He picked up the flashlight again and moved up the staircase. The second-floor corridor was now colder than before. The air had a flat, still quality, as if it had not been disturbed in a long time. He checked each side room, confirming that the windows were firmly latched. When he reached the last door, he stopped. The closed door seemed slightly more defined against the shadows, as though the darkness around it had been arranged in a deliberate way. He listened for several seconds before he realized he could hear a low sound, very faint at first. It resembled a murmur, like several voices speaking at a distance, through a wall or from the other side of a long hallway. The tone held no clear words. It rose and fell in simple waves, as if repeating short phrases in a language he could not parse. The tone was neither urgent nor calm, just steady. He considered the possibility that the sound came from the old vents or from wind moving across the roof and resonating in the walls. Yet something about the rhythm felt intentional. He raised his hand and placed it against the door panel. The wood was extremely cold. The murmur paused, then continued at a slightly lower volume. He removed his hand and stepped back. The flashlight beam trembled a little as his muscles adjusted. He felt no immediate threat, only a quiet, focused attention coming from behind the door. He told himself that he was responding to the age and isolation of the house. He turned and went back downstairs, keeping his steps even.
Near midnight, the temperature dropped further. Sparse traffic noise from the main road ceased entirely. The world outside the house became a blank white void. The town bells from the small church on the corner rang 12 times. Their sound carried faintly through the storm. As the last tone faded, Rowan woke suddenly from a half-sleep on the living room couch, unsure of what had pulled him out of it. He realized he could hear the same murmur again. This time, it did not come from above, but from the stairwell itself. It seemed to rest in the air halfway down, neither upstairs nor downstairs. The sound moved gently, as if adjusting its position. Rowan sat up and listened. Marissa was asleep in the bedroom they had decided to use downstairs. Nolan was motionless in the den. Rowan stood and walked toward the staircase, moving slowly. The murmur grew clearer, but not in content. Its presence grew clearer, like something adjusting its distance from him. He reached the bottom step and looked upward. The top of the stairs was in shadow, the hallway beyond faintly lit by a single wall fixture left on earlier. The voices, if they were voices, remained behind the closed door, but now pressed against it with more force, as though aware that the time had meaning. Rowan started up the steps. Halfway, the sound shifted again, becoming more focused. He felt a pressure in his ears, like the sensation experienced during a change in altitude. At the top, he paused and drew in a slow breath. The closed door waited at the end of the corridor. The murmur rolled through the air in a consistent pattern, never rising to a recognizable word. Now, however, there was something else layered beneath it, a tone that suggested an attempt to address him specifically. The door seemed to lean forward slightly, although he knew it was an illusion of perspective. He walked the length of the hall, counted each step to steady his mind, and stopped at the door. The now sound came in waves that matched his breathing. He placed his palm flat against the center of the panel. It felt like the surface of ice. For a moment, everything went completely silent. The voices stopped. The wind outside paused. The furnace did not hum. The house held its breath. Then a single pattern arose from behind the door. It was quieter than before, but focused. He did not recognize any familiar language, yet he understood something about the intention. It was not a plea for help, and not a threat. It resembled a statement of continuation, a simple indication that something remained in place, repeating a cycle that did not depend on his presence. He thought about the note his aunt had left with the deed, the way her hand had tightened in the lines near the end when she referenced winter and the upper hall. He thought about family stories half remembered from his childhood, stories about a relative who had disappeared in this house on a December night long before he was born. The details were never clear. The adults had lowered their voices when they spoke about it, treating it more as a warning than an event. His hand remained against the door. Slowly, he felt the impression of another touch from the other side, mirroring his palm. There was no pressure, only a suggestion, as if the wood had grown thinner for a second and allowed the idea of contact to pass through. The voices swelled for a moment, not louder, but more dense. His chest tightened briefly. Then the sensation faded. When he removed his hand, the murmur diminished immediately. It returned to its prior distance, like a sound heard far below the surface of water. The house filled again with ordinary noises. Pipes expanded as the furnace cycle resumed. The wind reasserted itself. Somewhere in the structure, an old beam adjusted with a dull internal sound. Rowan stayed there for several minutes, watching the closed door. It no longer seemed to lean forward. It was just another door in an old house, edges painted over, frame slightly warped. Yet he understood that something on the other side would repeat its pattern each year at this time, moving no more than the width of the door, never opening, never fully retreating. He walked back down the hallway, descended the stairs, and checked on Nolan. The boy slept without disturbance, one hand resting near the model train on the table. Marissa turned slightly in her sleep, but did not wake. Rowan returned to the living room and sat in the dim glow of the tree, listening to the house readjust to its normal level of sound. Outside, the storm continued through the rest of the night. Snow rose past the bottom edge of the windows. The town remained quiet, its streets empty, lights blurred in the distance. In the upper hallway, behind the closed door with its painted frame, the air waited in stillness for another year to pass and for the pattern to begin again on another December night.